Now for our speakers today. So I can see the lovely Rebecca and Rajiz there already. So let me introduce you two formally, and then as always, let's get into a really interesting chat. So first of all, I'd love to introduce Rebecca Horton, who's had an international career that spans 2 decades at the pinnacle of talent thinking. Rebecca delivers loads of wisdom. She works with corporates, leaders, and she's very strategic, pragmatic, and playful. A couple of things that Rebecca talks to business and HR leaders about is about how to rethink talent for today, how to level up leadership through mentoring, workshops, webinars, all of that sort of thing, and how to actually have more agility in your workforce, which is going to be a great segue to what we're going to talk about today. Now, Rajiz is the Vice President Asia Pacific at an organisation called Gloat. Now, Rajiz, I'm going to get you to tell us about what you do, because you've been involved in, I think, over 5 startups in HR technology, and you're a subject matter expert on talent acquisition and also talent management. And I love how these two things are coming together now, because we're talking tech and humans, and I reckon that's an awesome combination. So rather than me read out the rest of your bios, welcome Rebecca and Rajiz. Lovely to have you here.
Hey Alex, yeah, lovely to be here. Gee, it's confronting when someone reads out your bio, isn't it? It seems so much better when someone reads it as opposed to what's happened in the past. But no, I'm super excited to be here. Really happy to have this conversation, particularly with Rebecca. Rebecca's certainly someone that I respect greatly, and we chat about these things quite a lot. So I'm looking forward to rapping about this topic and giving you my perspective, particularly from a technology perspective.
Awesome. I can't wait. Now, Rebecca, thank you for being here. Give us a bit more of the Rebecca Horton background before we jump in. And it'd be great to know how you and Rajiz come to work together as well.
Yeah, sure. So the Rebecca Horton background. All right. So the boring stuff. I was in recruitment for a few years over in the UK. I ran my own headhunting business in debt capital markets across 6 locations in Europe. And then I overstretched myself and decided Japan sounded like a good idea. It wasn't. It was a stupid idea. So when I fell off that stupid idea, I landed in Australia. And most recently, I was the head of talent for Australia Post. So in a nutshell, I looked after everyone who came in, moved around, or left, whether they wanted to or not, the organisation. So that was my job. And then for the last 2 years, I've been running a small boutique consultancy called Bold HR, and we do the stuff that Alex talks about. So really talent and leadership in a nutshell, particularly focused on talent and leadership in weird and wonderful times. So one of the things that I think I learned at Australia Post when letter writing started to fall off a cliff was what significant disruption really looks like from the inside, and how you respond at pace and at scale when you aren't ready. So lots of parallels to what's going on today.
So welcome to you both. And as I always say, the thing I love about this, there's a lot I love about this. One, it's talking to interesting people, but we get to have all these chats in the lead up to the live event about what are we going to talk about? And, we sort of riff on a lot of things, don't we? And when we were filming the promo, and we can start anywhere, but, I think Rajiz and Rebecca, we were talking about this concept of how do you really tap into the talent that's already in your organisation. We were talking about, we didn't anticipate this pandemic, this black swan event, as I think you called it, Rajiz, and the impact that's having. We were riffing about what it actually means to have an agile workforce. And I think that's a really good place to start, because, and you've both already heard in the lead up to you coming on just in the last 10 minutes, we've talked about what's next. We've talked about people being displaced. We've talked about, well, the cadence is already changing, but we don't know what we're going into. And certainly for me, I'm hearing lots of business leaders talking about, well, we know that we've got to change the way that we attract and that we lead talent, and we want a more agile workforce, but it's not quite happening how we'd envisage. So whoever wants to kick off, I know there's a lot there, but that was kind of the overall that we were chatting about that I'd love to get into today.
Yeah,
You go for it, Rebecca.
Okay, so I think first of all, we've relied historically, when we think about managing a workforce in an agile way, we've relied on quite blunt levers. As we said, I think in the promo, really typically what we've been concentrating on for the last 10 years in large organizations is either how well we hire people or how effectively we get them off board, typically so that we can hire more. And we're kind of in that constant cycle of pruning and replacing our workforce. Now, that's fine to a point. The problem is that that's no longer moving fast enough to keep pace with the level of change that we need to be good at. And therefore, going through 2 cycles every year of letting people go and hiring more people, by the time you finish that, which is quite blunt, it's quite start-finish, you're actually creating for your organization a kind of a false stop-start feeling, which stops you actually having a really fluid flow and gets in the way of you doing business more quickly and more adaptably. So for me, I think the concept of hire and retire kind of needs to be paused for a second and looked at, because it's too lumpy, it's too finite. And probably on the other side of the coin that I'm finding really interesting is that before 2020 turned into the worst year of any of our lives, we were in 2019, which we were calling the worst year of any of our lives. I don't know if anyone remembers. Ironic, wouldn't we all love to be back in 2019? Oh, yeah. Anyway, what we were hearing in 2019 was how, for the first time in many years, the number one reason for not being engaged at work and the number one reason for leaving your job had become a lack of career development. And it had overtaken a bad boss for the first time in years.
Yeah, right.
So these two kind of forces happening at the same time really tells me that we no longer have a choice. It's no longer a debate. We must manage our talent in a very different way.
And so, Rajiv, what's your take on all these sort of the themes that Rebecca's talking about, and this stop-start, because that definitely resonates about having these quite old school kind of, the quite blunt levers, as you're saying, Rebecca. So, Rajiv, from your perspective in the work that you do, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, so I also, like Rebecca, started life as a recruiter, and probably for the last 15 years, been with technology companies that by and large have helped organizations become much more sophisticated around the way that they've gone out to the external market to find people. And, what we're seeing is, with all of this change that Rebecca refers to, with, organizations trying to transform to become, a much more digital sort of enterprise in the way that they deliver their services to their customers. And now with, COVID, you see, even consumer behavior has changed significantly. So we're all, being forced to, interact with service providers and products online. So what's happening is organizations have realized that in order to remain relevant, stay competitive, survive, they had to compete in this market for talent that was in short supply. And that problem is going to persist. And even, if you look at the broader sort of demographics, aging population, low fertility rates, the supply of people that we need coming into our organization is tight. And so that whole concept ends up being like a zero-sum game. You either hire the person or you don't. Now, the issue is, even if you are successful in hiring the person, as Rebecca touched on, they come into the organization, you've promised them all these really amazing things, you've got this great employer brand, you've developed this employee value proposition, etc. They come into the organization, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, millennials want to move every, 2 years within the organization. All this kind of research suggests that talent is much more fluid, but companies, by and large, never really focused on, how do we provide opportunity to these people as they come into the organization, and not only opportunity in this concept of, kind of going up the ladder in this construct of an organizational hierarchy, but opportunity cross-functionally, horizontally, so that the career development, now doesn't look like a ladder. It actually looks much more like a lattice. And so, organizations are really pivoting to think about, okay, how do I provide these opportunities, these career development opportunities for people as they come into the organization. And it's a huge focus right now. And we're seeing it, as a really big theme for most large kind of enterprise companies.
So this is really interesting. I'm sorry, Rebecca, because I just want to, I mean, there's so much to pick up on as always, but so just this, I think it's a really good point to talk about, you know, we're reflecting on where we are. We've already heard that there is, I think a lot of people thinking, but that's all great, but you know, there's no jobs out there at the moment. Like who on earth, when we're about to go into whatever it is that we're going into and a recession and everything else, that the ripple effect of this that we still don't know. I feel like there is quite a feeling that you know, reskilling kind of, it isn't the right time to think about skilling or talent, and everyone's kind of worried about keeping the job they've got and having less, and profits are down, and you know, I feel like that's thematically kind of a bit of a fear, but that certainly doesn't sound what you're both talking about or seeing.
Yeah, I'd kind of, so I completely hear you in terms of how people are feeling about the market state and the prospective market state, because it's, yeah, it's not great. But when I think about the true cost implications that we are prepared to face into, if we think about, so for example, if we think about, you know, laying somebody off, and not purely for downsizing purposes, but one thing that we know is that pretty much all organizations who do have to trim in a downturn will pick up again to the same or a larger size within 3 to 5 years. So let's assume that you're going to replace that person's job within 3 to 5 years. In the year that you let them go, the average cost of doing that is about 90 to 100 grand. That's very significant. The average cost of hiring somebody is between 5 and 25 grand. You know, also quite significant. The average cost of reskilling somebody, according to the World Economic Forum, is 5 grand. So unless you're absolutely sure that you're going to stick with your workforce plan and spend the big bucks of letting people go this year and not actually then replace them in any way or spend any more money for another 2 years, you're not going to get your ROI. And I don't think any of us are that sure, are we?
Oh no!
So, yeah, I just say there's kind of an assumption versus the reality of the costs of these big levers that perhaps really need to be understood before we allow assumptions to overtake our decision-making process.
Yeah, I agree. There's you know, plenty of research out there. I think you know, McKinsey wrote this report evaluating companies that made investments in allocating, reskilling during the GFC. You know, the report was suggesting that there was an additional sort of 10% return to shareholders for those companies that really, you know, took the opportunity to invest in building capability during this kind of downturn. Now, it is a difficult decision. Don't get me wrong. It's not an easy decision to make when you know, there's a lot of downward sort of revenue pressure. There's a lot of pressure on you know, cost and capital expenditure and so on. But I think the big theme here is what we're seeing is you know, company. It's not really kind of a growth strategy. It's sort of a stay in business strategy, a survival strategy. So you know, if you don't invest in your people during this period of time, particularly as, you know, we're experiencing huge structural shifts, huge market shifts and business model shifts and so on. And so in order to ensure that you survive as we come out of this, and we will come out of this, and there's some really optimistic signs already happening, you know, you're not going to be prepared. And that's going to put your organization at a huge competitive disadvantage if you're not making the right strategic decisions. Now, this is, as I mentioned, you know, huge challenge. It's really, you need to have the visibility of the skills and capabilities you have within your workforce, firstly, and that's a fundamental challenge for most organizations. Secondly, you know, you need to think about, you know, what is the business strategy? What are the big bets as the CEO you're going to make in the future to ensure that your organization, you know, remains competitive? And is it the right strategy? How does the people strategy support that business strategy, etc.? And then think about those people that their jobs aren't going to be around or the same. How do you provide them career development opportunities, learning opportunities in order to reskill, to start to look at reallocating them to areas of the business, you know, that either have demand today or are going to have demand in the future?
So, I mean, this sounds completely logical, right? And I'm sure, so a lot of our amazing crew here, I mean, they're leaders with their own teams as well as being team members. So we're all thinking about, you know, how do we think forward, be more strategic? Like you're both saying, you know, we've got the current constraints that look fairly dire, but we still have to invest and having the faith and the foresight to do that. So if we're now talking about, so, you know, if I'm a leader in financial services and I'm loving the idea of having a more adaptive team, and I'm agreeing wholeheartedly about resourcing's always tight and things need to change. I mean, what are the sort of skills, I guess, what are you both seeing that is required to actually make a team more adaptive? Like what are these things that we should be reskilling for? And how do we, to your point, Regis, you know, how do we really have a great line of sight on our internal talent marketplace rather than constantly thinking, oh, I need to go outside for talent?
Do you want me to have a go at this, Rebecca?
Well, I think you've got some brilliant case studies, and I think, you know, Alex has kind of hit us with two questions. One is how do we plan for the future? You know, how do we know what jobs and what skills, and also how do we know what we've already got in house? You know, because there's a million hiring managers out there who will tell you very confidently that they know there is nobody in the organization that has these skills. And you have to kind of shrug your shoulders and go, really? There's 30,000 of us. How do you know that? So you know, I think I'd love to hear Regis, because he's got some really great case studies of organizations who have really leaned into that and owned it and solved it.
Yeah. So you know, it won't come as a surprise to you as a tech guy. You know, I think that one of the solutions is kind of having you know, technology in place to give you the visibility. So that certainly assists with leaders having you know, aggregate kind of visibility of all the skills and experiences that they have. So that's a significant consideration. Then, you know, Rebecca sort of mentioned that we have some examples of our customers that have really lent into this strategy. Unilever, for example, is a you know, 150,000 people organization. In fact, their CEO was on an earnings call last week who referenced how valuable creating an internal talent market was in terms of their ability to react and respond to COVID. So there were many people, I think, you know, they reallocated over 4,000 people from areas of the business that were in decline to areas of the business that were on the front line that were in demand. So they wouldn't have had the opportunity to be able to reallocate those people at that pace, at that scale, you know, without having kind of AI-powered internal marketplace technologies in place. And, you know, Rebecca, obviously, you know, with her time at Post, was kind of way down this path, a very kind of early adopter of the whole kind of vision and strategy here. Unfortunately, the technology at the time didn't sort of meet the kind of opportunity, but certainly, you know, creating visibility is a really, really big key to make better decisions.
I think and it's one of those things, isn't it, that sounds, it's so obvious, but we haven't quite nailed it. And I completely get what you're saying. And I think it's interesting as well, because a lot of our community, you know, in various ways, they're not necessarily, some have been redeployed, some have, you know, recently been made redundant. But I think a lot of people feel like they're at a bit of this crossroads, just with everything that's, you know, I guess this reflection and inflection point over the last couple of months about what do I want to do next? So I think this concept of reskilling, you know, not just for an organization going, wow, what do we even have here at our fingertips that we're not leveraging and making the most of? But I also think for individuals, you know, thinking, well, you know, I don't mind the idea of reskilling. I do want to do something different, but I don't know, how do I find, I think it's this, like Regis, you're sort of talking about this two-sided marketplace in an organization of how do you find each other in the opportunities. So I know that maybe now's a good time to do a quick poll. What do you think, Rebecca?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to hear what other people think.
So Cam, I know you've got a quick poll here for these, just around, so on the scale of 1 to 5, 1 being poor and 5 being great, how would all of you rate your organisation in terms of career or workforce agility? So is there anything else you want to add to that, Rebecca, in terms of context, or it's?
No, I think I'm very, very curious to feel very broadly how people think they're going with this concept of driving more agility. And it could be that you're answering from your personal perspective as an employee, that you feel that your career agility in your current employer isn't very well supported, or it could be as a leader or a mixture of both, that you feel that your ability to resource in a really agile way, find the skills and experiences you need rather than relying on recruitment all the time, whether you feel that that's in a pretty good shape or not so much. I do a lot of thinking and talking on this topic. So for me to be able to gather a bit of information as I go around is really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So Cam, we'll leave that poll open for a bit and give people a chance to respond to that.
Yep.
And you let us know when we've got some results there to share. So look, I think this makes complete sense to me. So we want to be more agile. We want to reskill. We need to be more fluid. And I think you say, Rebecca, we need to be more liquid instead of this traditional stop-start in terms of talent and responding to change, which, let's face it, as we know, it's just a constant. Like, we're never not changing, especially from a business perspective. Rajiz, you've given already a good example around Unilever. I'd love to know from both of you, what are the common pitfalls or barriers to actually establishing an approach like this? Because, it's always these things. It sounds really great. And I'm sure a lot of our community are going, yeah, I'd love that. But what are the common barriers or challenges around really implementing an approach like this?
Yeah, they're probably all pre-implementation, aren't they, Regis?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of work at the front end, before you even think about technology, as you know, that needs to happen from a business readiness perspective in order to drive that transformation. But you please go ahead and talk about that piece, and I'll give you some examples of some of the challenges or barriers that we face as we get into an implementation. What are the main sort of questions?
So I think up front there's always a series of objections that people give you. So one is that our people won't reskill. Another one is our people can't reskill. The gap is too big, and I can't turn a truck driver into a call center operator, which just saying we did. We kind of we make these assumptions about our workforce capability. Then we overcomplicate things. We go, well, we must have a competency framework, and we must we must map every single skill possible, and we must have a really clear workforce plan. So we need to know the jobs of the future. And at this point, you've just gone, that is just too hard basket in a really colossal way. So the whole thing stops. The thinking stops, because at that point, it has got too hard. Now, we started there, and I'll confess to you, I lost 2 years of my life that I'll never get back, going down exactly those rabbit holes. And we discovered we didn't need them. We don't need that level of thinking. And I think once we removed that barrier, we started to move in smaller, more experimental ways, and we started to move, prioritize what we do know over what we don't know, and understand what people's motivation really was. We discovered and did a whole load of myth busting. I could give you a list of 5 assumptions that we made that were totally wrong.
Oh, can you? Do you mind sharing? I'd be fascinated.
So one was the cost, which we talked about. The facts around reskilling our workforce is going to cost too much. Well, the facts were wrong. One was the motivation. Our people don't particularly want to reskill. They feel like they're getting told to. But actually, when you're in a genuine disruptive moment, if you read the papers and you'd know what's going on, like everybody at Australia Post did when people stopped writing letters to their friends, they know that their jobs are on the line. They are highly motivated. From a Maslow's hierarchy, it's probably the 5th most important thing that you could threaten somebody with. So they're deeply motivated to do something about it. And we made a wrong assumption there. I think we assumed that they didn't know that we were all in a bit of trouble. The ability to reskill, this sense of leapfrogging from one job family to another where the gap is just too wide, again, was proven wrong. We took a really great leaf out of Toyota's Drive program, where what they did was look at job planning on a concentric circles kind of approach. Now, I tend to do it on what I call a 3-shape. I know people are very familiar with what a T-shaped professional looks like. So, one deep vertical and some horizontal knowledge, but actually building out more of those legs becomes a really important piece. And if you matrix up everything in your job family, all the different tasks that people do, you'll very clearly start to see what jobs are made up of more or less what you do now, but they're called something very different. and maybe there's 3 or 4 boxes that you don't have yet, but you could go and get those skills. And then when you reorganize your job description, turns out that it's exactly a good match to that job description. So this is called role adjacency planning. So looking at how to break down your capability and a job's capability and then shuffle them around and match them again, which is when you're only doing it within one job family or job families that are quite similar to each other, is not that complicated an exercise. Of course, if you're doing it at scale, it really helps to have some good tech. And Regis is smiling at me here. I tell you what, I wish I'd had his tech back then. I've never used it. But every problem that I remember going through, and every sleepless night and massive, mess of a head that I had to live with, it feels like we've got the technology in the market that would solve for that now. So talk to me a little bit about the way that.
I mean, I'm smiling because there are many companies that have spent years on trying to figure out their job architecture, figure out their skills taxonomy, and all of these things that, take a lot of time, but, pretty static. You get to a point and all of a sudden, disruption happens. There's a new skill that's required. There's a new role that's created and so on. I mean, the beauty of technology now and kind of leveraging, machine learning, like deep learning models and AI that have the ability to consume all of this information and kind of understand the attributes of these different things and derive meaning of this role has this skill with this adjacent skill or these experiences. And so the AI does all of that work for you. And it is in our context, it's dynamic and evolving. And so these things, when you apply technology to solve that kind of big data set problem, that's where you really start to get the value of kind of where the tech is. But I agree, you have to do a lot of that thinking, at the front end to ensure that, strategically you're kind of heading in the right direction. But in terms of practical steps, like what we've seen, some organizations like, Schneider as an example, one of they've sort of published this post that referred to 6 practical steps. They've got, revised policies that impede mobility. And in fact, they said, sometimes just do away with policies altogether. Leverage technology, leverage AI to kind of build a marketplace that enables you to match opportunities to workers. Go beyond the job board and kind of create this gig economy, this internal gig economy. Enable a learning culture. So enable employees to be matched to mentors, to be matched to gigs and job swaps, and these things that Rebecca's talking about that kind of give all these different legs, so that when you flip this employee development model on its head, what you're doing is you're democratizing career development, and you're giving the worker the opportunity to explore their career development based on their passions, their aspirations, unlock their capacity, and do a whole range of other things. And so, and then, looking at how do you leverage analytics and data to drive focus and drive, strategy and so on and so forth. So these are some of the kind of practical steps that we've seen our customers leverage.
Yeah.
I love that. And
it makes a huge difference.
It makes it, I mean, I can see and hear from what you're both saying. So, Rebecca, I think probably a question for you. So, you hear about this and how, and this is what I love. The fact is, it's not, humans aren't being replaced. It's how we use tech and humans and reskilling. Like, these are all the things that are really important for the future of work. I mean, there's a lot being said about, oh, well, look, we now can all work remotely and there's flexibility, but it's so much more than that. Thanks. There's the poll, Cam. So what have we got there, Rebecca? Can you see that?
Yeah, I can. So everyone's about medium. They're feeling kind of okay. Mm-hmm. And if anything, feeling like their organizations are doing a pretty good job. So I'm surprised, but I'm delighted. So that's thank you. Really good info for me.
That is good info. But I think it's also, when you don't know what's maybe truly possible, you think, well, yeah, look, it's okay, because I haven't seen what it potentially could be. So I think that's interesting as well, because I think, Regis, you've given us a couple of really great examples of big global organizations that are really tackling this in a different way. It just occurred to me when you were talking about the tech side, and Rebecca, I just wanted to ask you, so as a leader then, you know, if you're starting to think this way, like, we've had some practical steps from both of you already, but literally, so if I'm leading a team, I'm in financial services, we're exactly where we are now, which is kind of one foot in remote working from home and one foot kind of going back to an office, and we're trying to recalibrate how I bring that team back together and what's next. And I'm interested in how to start creating this workforce agility and reskilling and starting to think differently about my talent. Like, literally, where do I start? You know, because I think also a lot of people would be thinking, well, okay, but surely, you know, the HR people in the organisation will have ideas about this. You know, where can I start? What can I possibly do as a leader? I mean, where do we start?
I think if we start in a small way, so let's say you've got a team of 10 people and you're in one of those areas where you've got some impact and some changes happening, and from time to time you get projects that are a bit weird, or you're starting to kind of go into that grey area of stuff you haven't really done before as a group. I think it's really important to take stock of the capabilities that you've got and the experiences you've got. So you could do something really quite simple. You could kind of build out a grid and get people to put in individual tasks or skills that they have, and perhaps experiences that they have, and use even remotely, you could use a whiteboard like a Miro or a mural. You could do a bit of a sticky note exercise to work out what have we got across this grid. And what we'll probably find is that many of us have quite similar skill sets and experiences. And then we'll have a look at where do we think the work is starting to pull us, you know, where on this grid are we starting to see the desire for more capability, and mark those up. And then I think just have a discussion amongst yourselves. So who's doing the kind of the cool new stuff right now? Because whoever that person is probably really under the pump, feeling really alone and vulnerable. And you as a leader should be terrified that they get sick, because they're pretty much the only person who can do this. And what you know is that if they're the only person that can do this inside your financial organization, they're one of the only people in the market that can do this. So going to market to replace them will take you a long time and cost you a lot more. So what you need to have a think about is, how could I move some of my people who are over here in my more traditional skill sets, and how might I get them one step closer? You won't get them all the way there in one go, but what kind of exposure could they have? How could they help this individual? What smaller tasks that make up the whole job could they start to do so that they are half ready, a third ready, 75% ready? And you kind of move the dial yourself, physically and tactically, move your team across to the other side of the matrix so that you've got people more ready. They might not be, you know, the world's leading expert, but they'll have been following somebody who's pretty good and getting really good exposure and appreciation and some basic practices around what that job looks like and how to execute it. So that should you suddenly need 1.5 or 2.5 people, you could potentially make it up with extra parts of your team. And this is where it gets really interesting, because they're going to be more motivated because they're learning, and they're learning something that they're interested in. You'll probably find that they will do their job and more. And that's typically what we have found, is that nobody works at 100% capacity. That's not normal. We don't do that. We get paid salary. So there is probably 15 to 20%, maybe even more, available capacity in every single worker that we've got. And the reason that they're not unlocking it is because they're not motivated to do so. But if you gave them something that was motivating enough, they would choose to do more, work harder while they were there, take a shorter lunch break, whatever. They would choose to do that. And I think our role as leaders is to help frame that for them so that they can make that choice. And I think that would be a nice basic way to do it as a team, to kind of co-create what that might look like, and then to talk to those people at the new end of the matrix about how might they engage help from time to time, and how would that motivate others to give them their time in exchange for some skills and experience.
I love it. I think it's super practical, and I'm hoping that everyone here is taking some of these small steps. The thing I take from both of you as well, I mean, there's so much, we could talk for ages on this. It's such a big topic, but I'm loving the themes of, you know, it's about, it's culture as well, and it's a learning culture, and it's taking small steps, and it's not going, wow, I need, you know, this recurring theme, everyone. We don't need to be perfectionists. We don't need to be afraid of failing. You know, Nikki's talked earlier about mini experiments. So I think I'm loving this, because I feel like this is really exciting, that as a leader, I've got my current resources, and if I just put a bit of process and map where we are now, or maybe where we need to go to, and where some gaps are, even at that small level, even if you're not the chief people officer in your organization, you can start to move the dial. And that if we start to bring in some really, you know, cool technology and AI to actually start to really, I love this concept, Rajeev, of this internal talent marketplace. So look, we're out of time. It just goes fast in here, but thank you both for coming. So if anyone wants to find out more about how they can actually mobilize and get more agile around their talent, and maybe look at some different tech solutions and to reach both of you, how can they do that?
Probably best to reach out on LinkedIn, I'd say. And I've put my LinkedIn
You're both in
post.
LinkedIn. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, LinkedIn's a good place to start. Yeah,
it is a good place to start. So look, thank you so much. It's been really great, and lots of practical tips here, and I think some real thought provokers. So for all of us who are leading teams and thinking about what's next, you know, this is where we can start to design what that looks like, even if we've got resource pressure and, you know, all those sorts of things. And for those of us, I think, that are looking for that next role or what next, you know, there's some really great tips around changing mindset here about reskilling, and there's loads of opportunities out there. Talented leaders are always looking for more talent. So thank you both for coming on today, and thanks for that link as well, Rajeev, in the chat as well. So Cam, I think just as we finish up, we have a quick poll from us. Can you see that Cam's just worked out how to use the poll function in Zoom? So, you know, he's a little bit excited about that. But we'd love to know practically, because the cadence of work is changing, what's suiting all of you, our amazing regulars who are tuning in. Can you just please let us know, you know, what's at the best time for you? What's the biggest challenge for getting to regular events? We just want to keep improving this so you can still keep experiencing this, and we can keep bringing value to you. So if you can do that quick poll for us, we would be very, very appreciative of that as well.
So the poll answers are coming through, Alex. We'll leave it open for a little.
Beautiful. Great. And as always, for those of you who aren't members yet, like I always say, please do come and join us and just find out what the value is of being a member at FEW. We are very passionate about our advocate network, about our support network, about learning and development. But for me, it's all about connecting and supporting each other as peers. Judith and I do regular small group mentoring, which is our circle events. They are for a peer group that fits where you are in your career. They're confidential, and there are some amazing connections that come out of these. And of course, our masterclass events. So if you aren't yet a member, I am running one at 2 o'clock today, and I do that every week. So please do come along. Cam's put the link in the chat, and come as our guest and suss it out. How are we going there, Cam?
We have 17 out of 36. So quickly, guys, jump into the poll before you do hang up. We do want to know what time of day you want to see us going live. And currently, lunchtime is still winning considerably by overwhelmingly winning. So, damn, I thought it was going to be the evening. I really did. But so keep voting there before you hang up from the call today. Just what time of day is best for the live streams and the masterclass events for you, everyone that's on the call.
Awesome. And thanks everyone, and keep giving us your feedback. So it's been brilliant to have Rebecca and Rajeev here. Thanks again, guys. Please do connect with each other, connect with our amazing guests, and keep building those networks. And we will see you tomorrow at 12. See you then.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.